All right, welcome to BuffaloPlus.com as well as Buffalo Plus's YouTube page. Mike Catalana, Dan Fetes. I am Jenna Cottrell. We just heard from Sean McDermott, the Bills head coach, as he gets ready for the summer break, then the start of training camp. Mike, I want to hear from you. What are your thoughts about how McDermott is preparing this team for the break and then the start of camp likely later in July?
The John Wooden quote, the failure to prepare is preparing to fail, right? Is anybody more prepared than Sean McDermott? If you're a Bills fan, it's a crazy time for the NFL getting ready for all this, but you have probably the most organized, and the word he used, disciplined coach in the NFL. I think he'll be ready for what happens now, how they adjust if a player tests positive. And what I asked him was when the rules change, because they will, like in every other business, if he had like a protocol coach, and he wouldn't quite go that far, but he has people following those rules, being ready to adapt. I think that's what you need to be. And I think no one knows exactly how it's going to go, but I think you should be pretty confident that he'll be ready for whatever happens.
Yeah, exactly. I think he will be also ready for whatever happens, agreeing with Mike there, because he got asked a question too by Tim Graham of The Athletic, who said, well, what if the season gets shortened, or what if something happens in the season? And Sean McDermott, the ever positive guy that he is, was kind of saying, well, you know, as far as I know, we're going to have a season, and that's how we're going to do it. But to Mike's point, being prepared, Sean McDermott also added, you know, the what ifs. What if somebody in his, you know, on the team comes down with COVID? What if somebody in their front office staff? What if somebody in the training staff comes down with it? He said he's got a bunch of different people that are constantly working with him, kind of working with the staff. So I thought it was interesting where we've always talked about how uncertain this time is too. We're also not trying to prepare a football team for a season. We're trying to figure out how to do our jobs. Like Mike said with businesses, Sean's trying to get a team together that's supposed to make a deep playoff run.
Yeah, I mean, there's obviously pressure that's involved with that. And McDermott was saying the fact that there's still a gap. Like, they've had the virtual offseason, obviously, but those reps, he said they missed out on about 500 reps for the guys. And obviously every football team is in the same position. But Mike, how does McDermott balance being disciplined and also adapting, knowing the expectations that are on the Bills?
I think it helps that we've been in this circumstance for a while. It's not like it's something that just came up yesterday and now you got to adjust, and, you know, a guy who likes things done a certain way has to say, now what do I do and how do I do this? Because I think they've been preparing for it, knowing that it's going to be a very different circumstance. So, you know, he did also talk about the continuity, and he did give in to say, hey, the continuity is important because, you know, they're bringing back so many starters and so many people who've been part of this. So while everybody is technically in the same place of the NFL, that's not really the case, because this team has that continuity. And I think while it's not what they wanted, missing the 500 reps, imagine missing the 500 reps if you're a team that has never been together as a group before.
Yeah.
But it was interesting. Sean did say, you know, the quote was, continuity is, quote, a good ingredient. It's a good start, but games aren't going to be won with continuity. So I think it is interesting. I think we've always made a big point, and I always go back to it. We talked to Brian Baldinger, and he said, like, what does it really matter? And I think Sean McDermott is trying to balance out how glad he is and relieved to have 80% of his roster back, while also going, we can't just roll the football out because we were all together last year.
Yes, but imagine with the changes that went in place last year, it being a COVID.
Patriots with a new quarterback.
Well, that's but they have, you know, much of their staff is still back and all. Not that the Bills didn't have that, but look at the changes on offense they made a year ago. Revamped the whole wide receiver position. Josh only in his second year. The whole, like I said, the line, the wide receivers, everything different. Whereas this year, yes, it doesn't win games for you. It doesn't impact the scoreboard starting week one. It's got to help. There's no help.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that, Mike. I think it's classic Sean McDermott to kind of tamper expectations. You know, it's a process, all of that. But I think, you know, I think he knows how nice it is to have guys already know his systems, to have players that already can talk to the other guys, the younger guys, get everyone ready. Because you have, you know, those player type coaches in terms of guys that know what's going on. But I also thought it was interesting because, you know, these guys haven't really had access to the gyms. The players have been on their own for this time period getting ready. And Mike, I want to ask you, what do you think of, you know, McDermott talked about ramping things up. but also going with gut instincts of how to do training. How important do you think that is, considering this offseason that we've had has been just, in terms of a training standpoint, unprecedented?
I think it's huge. And even in a regular year, there are guys who come back a little different than the team expected, right? Or maybe they haven't quite come back from an injury or whatever it is. And there's a natural progression. They'll look at a player and go, this is going to take a little while longer, right? We are going to be stunned, I think, about the way certain players come back. Some guys may have done nothing but work out, and they're in the best shape of their life. And other guys, maybe they started out that way, as McDermott said, that discipline. He referenced New Year's resolutions, which I thought was great.
Good.
By the way, he sticks to all those New Year's resolutions.
100%.
Oh, absolutely.
Like he sets them and says,
and the whole McDermott household does.
and he keeps a chart. Now they're ready to go. But I think about that and I'm thinking there's going to be some things this year that no one is anticipating. It's not just in the NFL. When we see these other sports come back, I think there's a mindset that says, when the LA Lakers come back or when the Philadelphia Flyers come back, they're not going to be what they were 3 months ago. Like, we don't know what players have been doing. So I think to that point, Jenna, excellent thought there on the ramping up, because, man, you're going to want to get them in there and get them going. And you got to be smart, because you don't want to lose a guy a week in because you went too hard on something when you lose them for a whole season.
I thought it was interesting, too. The other, it was a lot of what ifs. It was a lot of how did the virtual offseason go. But he made a point. Chris Brown asked him a question about Dawson Knox and in the offseason that he's had, because Josh Allen made a point to talk about how he's progressed. And I thought it was really interesting. Sean talked about how important that QB tight end relationship is, and he actually used references of previous teams that he was on. He talked about Donovan McNabb and the tight end relationship that he had, as well as Cam Newton to Greg Olsen. I thought that was pretty interesting for a guy to really kind of point that out, that they really want Dawson to be that safety blanket, because we talk so much about Josh and his growth and him having all this pressure on him, but kind of saying tight end makes it a whole lot easier.
Yeah. I mean, I agree with that, but I think also, like, hearing Greg Olsen and Cam Newton, like, do you think what we saw from Dawson Knox last year, he made some big plays, but he also had some big drops. Like, how much pressure, Mike, do you think is on Dawson now coming into year 2 with the same quarterback and knowing the expectations that are there for him?
I think of all different levels of the way Knox could have played last year, and there'd still be pressure this year, right? If he'd have played great, can he follow it up? If he had not made a big impact, is he a bust? They thought he was going to be something good. In his case, I'll take it as a positive. He showed those flashes of being really good. And I think the mistakes he made are very correctable. Those drops, maybe a little lack of concentration, maybe trying to run before you catch it, that type of thing. Because we saw some big plays. Look at the one he made in Foxborough late in the year on that, on the deep ball.
That was a hell of a catch.
I think having that, but also realizing pretty quickly, I can't make those mistakes. I mean, every player is going to drop a pass. He had some big ones, had some big drops, but I think it's very correctable. I love the talent that he showed, and I love what he gives them in this offense. But there is pressure. There's always pressure, but I think it's a good pressure for Dawson Knox.
I was surprised also, jumping off of that, like, in terms of the younger players or some of the guys, Sean McDermott was asked about, you can't replace Kyle Williams, Eric Wood, Lorenzo Alexander, their type of leadership. And Dan, some of the names that McDermott mentioned, Reed Ferguson stepping up as a leader, long snapper.
Shout out long snapper.
John Feliciano. We were expecting it maybe to be other guys. Were you surprised by that?
Yeah, we had a group text going on during the Zoom, and Jenna, I thought you were expecting Sean to point out Tremaine Edmonds. I thought he maybe point out Deion Dawkins, because Deion was one of the few offensive linemen that were there in Florida for the Josh Allen workout. So I thought that showed great, leadership by Deion. And Sean did say that when you lose those guys, when they enter their 3rd and 4th year in the league with the team, they're expected to step up. So we all thought that was perfect. And then he goes with Mario Addison, the new guy, not new to the league, but new to the team. And then John Feliciano, who was always a great guy in the locker room to talk to, but we didn't really know because he wasn't necessarily the top-tier offensive lineman guy that we were thinking of. And then to give the shout-out to Jordan Poyer as well as Reed Ferguson. Definitely interesting. And that's an unprompted shout-out because hashtag long snappers can be leaders too.
I think Sean thinks about this. And I think he's been asked this question several times. And if you go through all of his answers, he's mentioned many of those players at different times. But I think he realizes levels of leadership can come in different places. I mean, a good example of John Feliciano in leadership, you guys remember when Josh Allen ran, fumbled it, Feliciano picked it up and got the touchdown. What did he say in the locker room afterward? Yeah, I was there to pick it up, but you know what? If I didn't miss my block, Josh doesn't get hit and doesn't fumble the ball. To me, that's a form of leadership. That doesn't make you the leader, but it's a form of saying, I got to look at myself first. Yeah, I made the play, but I could have prevented the fumble. So I think he's conscious of that. Plus, he loves the long snappers too. So that's why I love it.
I mean, I was just surprised when he said that, considering, like you said, Mike, I mean, those are names that we're not normally used to hearing. We're used to hearing the, obviously Josh and Tremaine. And just to hear some of those other guys was I wasn't really expecting that. But I guess, I think this team has now moved in a direction where those are the guys that are now expected to step up and to be leaders. I want to get your thoughts, Dan, just about, McDermott was asked about protests and whether or not players have come to him to protest. At this point, he said that no players have reached out to him, but he said he supports his players. Just what do you make of that? It's obviously early on, but do you expect there to be players protesting?
Yeah, I think Sean walked that fine line pretty well. I think that, he addressed a lot of the social injustice and a lot of those things in his last Zoom call with reporters. So I think he did, just kind of saying this one reiterated. We stand with our players, that we're going to listen to our players, that we're going to respect our players, and we're going to listen to them. And while he didn't say, flat out, we're going to kneel, or that players, he said, have not come out to him yet, but that when this, there's a long time before the season to go. I thought it was interesting. He just he reiterated again, the last two things that he said pretty much of the Zoom call were, I stand with my players, we're going to listen to our players, and then it starts with love, and then, it's respect and love after that. So I thought Sean walked that fine line without, Bill O'Brien, I think, came out and said that he would absolutely kneel with his players. I think Sean walked that fine line.
Yeah, and I think he also, it's a smart way to answer it, and I do believe he supports his players. I don't believe he felt there was a need to say that I will kneel. Right. But I think with Roger Goodell coming out now so publicly in support of the players, my guess is there's going to be a little more typical NFL way, a little more uniformity in what goes on. They're not going to be putting players or coaches in a position of feeling like, imagine that. What's Sean going to say to his coaching staff? If I'll just pick Leslie Frazier out and say Leslie Frazier or Brian Daboll want to kneel. I don't think he's going to want that. And I think he's going to want this to be a team supported thing. And the fact that the league is giving the players their blessing of protesting makes it much easier for a coach to support his players publicly that way. But he is right. We got some time before this happens. We don't know exactly how it's going to map out. But I think it was both an honest answer and a smart answer at the same time.
Yeah, I agree. Make sure to subscribe to Buffalo Plus's YouTube page. Over 300 subscribers so far. Also, check us out on buffaloplus.com. We also have a podcast.
Yes.
Buffalo Plus Podcast. So make
and that podcast is, Stitcher, iTunes, iHeartRadio. It's on just about anywhere that you can find a podcast. Buffalo Plus. We're on there every week. We'll be recording a new one tonight.
Yep. Search Buffalo Plus Podcast to find the podcast. All right. For Mike Catalana and Dan Fetes, I am Jenna Cottrell. Thank you for watching.
Let me stop that.